Perfect.
Salam. You're right. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وبارك على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, we in the previous lesson completed the Kitāb al-Buyu', the chapter pertaining to the transactions, the buying and selling, and we begin this new chapter, which is Kitāb al-Ijārah. Now, Kitāb al-Ijārah essentially is mulhaq bi Kitāb al-Buyu', so it's something which is an idafa and an addition, if you like, as you have in some books, the appendix for that particular chapter. So there's a clear connection between the two, because it still remains within the realm of and the discussion of transactions. However, within it, we are now not talking about the permanent owning of any particular product, the permanent owning of any particular product. Rather, it is the leasing or the hiring of a product or service. So it's referring to the leasing or hiring of a product or service. And so the author, raḥimahullāh, he begins this particular chapter by mentioning, وَلَهِيَ أَقْتْ عَلَى مَنَافِعٍ لَازِمٍ مِنْ طَرَفَيْنِ. لازم من طرفين. So it's a particular contract for a benefit, and you must have two parties. So it's a must that you have two parties when you have this particular contract. And when it comes to this manafi', something of benefit, then it's referring to that which is, for example, sukna al-dar. Sukna al-dar. So a person living in a particular abode. That's one example of a benefit. Or al-hamal il-makan mu'ayyan, to take something, carry something to a particular place. Naam. Wa khidmatul insan. Or also what can be regarded as khidmatul insan, doing a particular action of service or benefit for another individual. And the proof of that, from the proof that we have for that, is the ayah where Allah Ta'ala states, فَإِنْ أَرْضَعْنَ لَكُمْ فَأْتُوهُنَّ أَجُورُهُمْ. And so if they suckle, the women do the suckling on your behalf, then give them their ujur, give them their payment or wage for that particular service. And so when it comes to the bay', then of course the buying and selling is al-a'yan, referring to al-a'yan. So when it comes to the buying and selling, you buy and sell based upon a'yan, commodities, specific commodities. When it comes to the ijara, then ijara is alal manafi'. Then the ijara, then which you lease and hire, is upon things of benefit. Naam. And the author goes on to mention lazim min tarfain. There has to be two parties. Naam. There has to be two parties. ولا تنفسخ بموته ولا جنونه. And so this contract does not come to an end and is not cancelled by way of the death of one of the parties or their junoon, or the fact that they become insane. Now, this does not cancel the contract. The reason why the author here, raḥimahullah, mentions this particular point is because when it comes to al-Buyu', when it comes to the actual buying and selling, al-Bay', then it does cancel the contract. So if one of the parties, when it comes to a transaction, now one of the parties passes away, or one of the parties becomes insane, then in this scenario, the contract is cancelled. The contract will be cancelled. نعم. وتنفسخ بتلف العين المعقود عليها وانقطاع نفعها. And then the author goes on to mention that what does cancel the contract or break that contract, I'm talking about the contract of the leasing and hiring, then what does break that contract is the destruction of the particular thing that's being leased or hired, or the end of its benefit. So it can no longer bring about benefit. So, as for example, if now a house is being rented and the house becomes destroyed, now the house is destroyed, and of course the rental contract cannot continue because the person is not able to remain within that home. And so it cannot now still be understood that the person continues to rent that particular property. Naam. Or another example would be if a person is renting land. So a person is renting land and that land is irrigated, so there's water is able to reach that land due to the irrigation. However, the irrigation comes to an end. That means that the water reaching the land comes to an end, it's cut off by some means. And so the manfa'a, the benefit which is being used, has now been cut off. Because of course a person, if we're talking about the example of the land being rented, then the person is renting that land for the purpose of what, Barakallahu Feekum? Benefiting in what way though? Now cultivating it for crops, growing crops. But now if the means of the irrigation, if the means of the water reaching that land is cut off, then of course that the central benefit of using that land is now cut off. And so now the rental cannot continue. So then the author goes on to mention, وَلَا تَصِحُّ al-Ijārah. So لَا تَصِحُّ. So this rental, this leasing, is not correct إِلَّا عَلَى نَفْعٍ مَعْلُومٍ, except with an established benefit. So something which is established. نعم. And so from the means of that, إما بالعرف كسكن الدار وإما بالوصف كالخياطة الثوب معين وبناء الحائط وحمل شيء لموضع معين وضبط ذلك بصفاته. And so how is understood, how it's established what is being rented or hired, how this is established is almost is either by way of the urf, so the custom. So for example, the living within a particular home, so you establish that a person lives within a particular home, or with a particular description. So the urf, of course, is that which is the custom, is that you rent the home and what is understood within the home. So you don't need to, for example, now stipulate, for example, that when you rent the home, by way of renting the home, you're able to use the sink, you're able to open the windows, for example. Now, all of that is understood within the urf. If you're renting the home, you understood that you are able to benefit from everything that which is within the home. Now, even to the extent, for example, if you see a rental contract or even advert, it will mention that the home is furnished. Now, or unfurnished. So if we say now the home is furnished, then what we understand from that, of course, is that the person is able to benefit from anything which is from the furnishing. So the person is able to rent the home and benefit from the fridge, the washing machine, to be able to sit upon the seats. Now, all of that is regarded as being the benefit of the home. So this is the first thing. So the first way we understand it is from the urf. Naam, it's from the urf, that which is the custom. The second way that is established, that which is the nafan ma'loom, is by way of wasf, that is described and specified by way of description. So for example, the khiyatatu thawb ma'ayyan. So you have a specific يعني ثوب, and you describe how the thawb is going to be يعني tailored. Naam. So now this is the ijara. So you have now essentially paid for that thawb to be made, and you describe it in a particular way. And of course, this is what is referred to in terms of the tailoring of a thawb. There's another word for tailoring of thawbs. Another word that is used, beginning with a ta. Ta, fa. Then a fa. No. يعني تفصيل. نعم, تفصيل الثوب. نعم. So if when we have the word tafsil referring to يعني generally detail. The word tafsil referring to detail. So they say tafsil al-thawb. So when you're referring to tafsil al-thawb or thawb tafsili, this is a thawb that has been يعني has been tailored. Now a thawb has been tailored. So if it's a thawb is tafsili, then of course what it necessitates is that the person is given a wasf. He's given a description. Now, so he's described, for example, that I need the buttons to be like this. I need the sleeves to be like this, or that the collar to be like this or that. No, and this is the first manner or an example of the wasf. Why is this ijara and not bay'? Why does it enter? Why is it a discussion of ijara and not bay'? Is the question clear?
Yeah. To do with contract. To do with like requiring a service.
No. Essentially, no. Because you're not just buying the thawb. No, it's not the case where you're buying the thawb. You're asking them for their time to make that thawb as well. So if it was bay', for example, you have the thawb already there. It's already made. And you say, I'm going to buy this thawb off you. No. So you buy the thawb, then that's a direct transaction, a direct trade. I give you the money and you give me the thawb. No. But in this scenario now, you're not just asking for the thawb, but you're asking for the manfa'at, his time and his skill set to make the thawb. Naam. So you're now putting money forth in exchange for that person's skill set, and as a result of that skill set, you're going to get the thawb. Naam. So you're essentially paying for his khidmah, his service. Naam. So this is the distinction between the two. Naam. So if, for example, you was to buy a thawb already made, then that would enter into the discussion of what? Naam, buying and selling. If now you're asking for the thawb to be made, then this enters into the discussion of al-Ijārah. Naam, Ijārah, hiring someone for their services. طيب, an example as well of al-wasf would be the ha'it, bina al-ha'it, as mentioned by Ibn Qudāmah. So, for example, the building of a wall. So when it comes into the building of a wall, then of course you need to describe how it's going to appear. How that wall is going to appear. How do you want it to be built? Do you want it to be built this tall or this high, for example? Do you want it to be built with this material or that material? So all of that has to be ma'loom, has to be known. Naam. And then the other example mentioned by Ibn Qudāmah was hamal shay ila mawdi' mu'ayyan, to carry something to a specific place. So you're carrying something to a specific place. So in that regard, barakallahu feekum, if you carry something to a specific place, then of course you need to describe that place that needs to be carried to. And it cannot be left as something which is vague. It has to be mentioned in its detail as to where it is going to be carried, barakallahu feekum. And so all of this needs to be ma'loom, because this is what is ma'qūd alayh. All of this needs to be known. Why? Because this is what is ma'qūd alayh, referring to the fact that all of this is what the contract is going to be built upon. The contract is going to be built upon rent of the house. So the urf is known. When you rent the house, what happens? Or the description has to be specified, so that when you make that contract, the contract upon that specific description. Naam. Just irrespective of whether it's a written contract or a verbal contract. It's based upon a specific description. Allah Ta'ala knows best. Naam. فإن وقعت على عين فلا بد من معرفتها. And so, if it's upon something specific, then it's a must that you have the ma'rifah, the knowledge of it. Now, it's a must that is specific knowledge of it. And so, when it comes to the Ijāratul Ayn, then Ijāratul Ayn is of two types, barakallahu feek. The Ijāratul Ayn, so referring to the hiring of leasing of something specified, is of two types. Now, the first is in relation to the mudda, the time period. So you are specifying the time period. For example, what barakallahu feekum? Rental home. The rental home, you specify it based upon the time. Naam, so you rent the home based upon the time. Right, a month or 6 months or a year or whatever the case may be. Likewise, an example would be, not a common example that you have in Manchester, but example would be the khidmah, the services of the slave. The services of the slave. That is based upon time. So the person, for example, says, I'm going to take this individual slave and I'm going to have this slave for this set period of time. Again, month, year. Does that make sense? Then we have the second type, which is Ijārah lil-amal al-ma'lūm, where you have leased or hired for a particular action or work. So the work is what is being specified. So, for example, the person takes and hires the riding beast. Now, they take the riding beast for a specific action. Now, they take the riding beast, and the riding beast is used for a specific work or action. ومن استأجر, Ibn Qudāmah goes to mention, ومن استأجر شيئا فله أن يقيم مقامه من يستوفيه بإجارة أو غيرها إذا كان مثله أو دونه. So whoever now, they rent something, they rent a particular commodity, then they have to essentially, is referring to obviously how it's returned, and so they return it as it has been used. So return it as it's been used, similar to what we were discussing when it comes to the borrowing. So, for example, the person returns the home as they took it, if they rent it. And likewise, whether when it comes to the one that rents the land for the purpose of farming, and they may cultivate that which is lesser if it is of great, if it's of less harm to them. So they may cultivate that which is lesser. So they maybe have agreed to cultivate a particular crop upon that land, but they could take that which is lesser from it if it is of less harm. Now, and if, for example, an individual حمل شيء فيزيد عليه, so a person carries something, or they use the riding beast to carry something, but then they increase upon that. So essentially, for example, the person has the riding beast and then they increase upon that, meaning that they carry more than they agreed to carry. So they agreed that they're going to use a riding beast to carry their crops, for example, from point A to point B on one occasion during the day. But however, he does more. So he ends up carrying it on 3 occasions during the day, for example, for an extended period of time. Now, upon him is the ujra madhkura. So upon him is to pay that which he has hired and what has been mentioned, and with the za'id, as well as the increase. So he has to pay in relation to the increase of that particular amount. So if he's agreed to pay, let's say for example, he's agreed to pay £100 to carry for the period of a month, to carry for the riding beast to carry this crops from point A to point B. Naam. But he does it 3 times a day for that same period. Then of course he times that by the 3, by the addition that he did. So instead of the £100, he paid the £300, for example. Naam. To compensate for that, the addition to that. Thereafter, it goes on to mention, Ibn Qudāmah goes on to mention the issue of the destruction of the commodity. Naam, the destruction of the commodity, and who is liable, who takes the liability for the destruction of it. And so, if now the commodity becomes destroyed, من غير تعدي, or the commodity becomes destroyed and is in his possession, essentially the asl is that he has to replace it. The asl is that he replaces it. However, إن تلفت من غير تعدي فلا ضمان عليه. However, if that particular commodity becomes destroyed, من غير تعدي, so it's not from his actions, so it's not from his negligence, for example. طيب, فلا ضمان عليه, that liability is not upon him. So the example we can give is the person rents a home. Now the person rents a home and he leaves that home. When he's out, for example, a fire is caused. Let's say, for example, he has extension lead, attached to extension lead, attached to extension lead, attached to extension lead, and then it causes a fire. Now, and the house burns down. So, who's responsible for that? The renter. Now, the renter. Because he's in the home and it's from his negligence that he has caused the destruction of that property. Now, if, for example, same thing, home, whether or not the person's in it, say the person left, and the next door neighbors are having a fireworks display, but they're terrible at it. And when the fireworks hits the home, burns down their house. Now, the renter is liable. No, it's not. من غير تعدي. من غير تعدي. It's not from their negligence and from them falling short in that regard. Now, thereafter, Ibn Qudāmah goes on to mention as well, ولا ضمان على الأجير الذي يعجل نفسه مدة بعينها فيما يتلف في يده من غير تفريط. And so there's no liability likewise as well when it comes to the rental if the person يعجل نفسه, so he's leased out himself, his services. But then whilst he's using his services, leased out his services, something becomes destroyed, but it's not destroyed by way of his tafrit. It's not by way of his negligence. Then he's not liable for that. And so the ijārah, we understand this ijārah, this actual hiring and leasing itself, is al-darbayn, is of 2 specific types. The ijārah is of 2 specific types. The first is the khas And the second is the mushtarik, a specific and that which is mushtarik. So where it is comprehensive of more than one aspect. The khas specific on that which comprises more than one aspect. The khas, the specific, is الذي يؤجر نفسه مدة معلومة لخدمة أو خياطة. So for example, the person, he gives his services for a specific time. So he says, I'm going to be at your service for this specific time. So he says, for this specific time, I'm going to, for example, be at your service within your home. Or for this specific time, I'm going to be your driver, for example. Or the specific time, I'm going to work in the cause of tailoring. So what this is referring to essentially, what we know today as wages. Now, that the person offers a specific service in trading that with wage. Now, so they offer a specific service and they offer that and they're compensated with a wage or a specific amount of money. So now, if you are working and something becomes destroyed whilst you're working, however, it's not by way of your negligence, then the person that is working, the worker, the one that has essentially hired out his time, he's not liable for it because he's not negligible. Like, he's not negligent, rather. Does that make sense? Repeat it. So the person now, he has rented out himself, his time. Whilst he's working, something becomes destroyed. Something gets broken, for example. However, it got broken not because of him. It's not his fault it got broken. No, it just got broken whilst he was working. But it's not his fault. He's not liable for that. He is not liable for that, even though it happened whilst he was working. Because it's not, the reason for it is not tafrit. The reason for it is not his negligence. And him falling short. So that's the first type we're referring to, where the person rents themselves, which is khas. Then we have the second, which is the mushtarak. And the mushtarak is where you have the aqd, the contract, ala amalin mu'ayyan. So the contract is upon a specific action, a specific job. So you take the contract and you agree, for example, you're going to have a specific job. For example, so-and-so build me some shelves. So-and-so build me some shelves. So in this scenario, that's a specific job. So then you rent them for that time. Does that make sense? So what's the difference between the two? What's the difference between the two? The first one and the second one. Yeah, so he gives his time, and it's just essentially he gives that allotted time, and he's in receipt of money for that, a wage for that. The second one not related to time. The second one is related to the specific job. The second one is related to the specific job. So, for example, going back to the example of the thobe, you give the job to an individual to make the thobe. You give the job to the individual to make the thobe. So you go to the tailor and say you want this thobe made. Or you go to the builder, say you want this wall made. You go to the carpenter, you say you want these shelves made. All of these are related to that specific job, and it's not related to time. However, it could be specified within that contract time. So you say, I want this job done, but you want it done in a specific amount of time. Naam, and that is part of the contract. So, however, of course, the opposite is true as well. In relation to if the person who is liable. So if now the person, whilst working, he's negligent and causes damage, then he is liable for that cost because it's due to his negligence. So if he's negligible and he causes damage, then he's liable for the costs. So then Ibn Qudāmah goes on to mention, ولا ضمان أو ولا على الحجام ولا ختان أو طبيب إذا عرف منهم حذق الصنعة ولم تهجن أيديهم. And likewise, when it comes to the actions of the hijam, so when it comes to the actions of those that perform the hijama, the cupping, or the khitan, the one that performs the circumcision, or the tabib, the doctor, this individual is not liable. He's not liable. So say, for example, now the person is doing hijama and he does it properly, and he's qualified, but the person starts to bleed profusely, for example. This is not now the liability of the hijama practitioner, as long as they've done the job properly, and as long as the person is known to be an individual that is qualified and skilled in that regard. Naam. And so they're not liable based upon two conditions. They're not liable based on two conditions. So here, of course, Ibn Qudāmah is referring to the individual that is leased or rented, or he's given his time for the purpose of hijama, or the purpose of the what is done on the body. Naam. And so even though he mentions he specifies here the hijama, and he specifies khitan, or he specifies the doctor, then we understand what what is common amongst each of these individuals is that their time is used for the benefit of the people in terms of the medical benefit. So then this particular ruling is understood for anyone that falls under that specific description. Does that make sense, Barakallahu Feekum? So anyone that falls under that specific description, so anyone that does anything medically and comes under that description, then this is what is required from them. So they have two conditions. Two conditions in order for them not to be regarded as liable. The first condition is that they are regarded as individuals that possess and they have ma'rifah and skill in that particular science. So they have ma'rifah and skill when it comes to performing cupping or circumcision, or performing any medical action. So the second is that they do not go over bounds, and they do not surpass what they've been commanded to do. They do not surpass that which has been requested from them. So, for example, now a person has been requested to do the hijama, and he's a skilled practitioner of hijama, and the request of the individual is now to do the hijama on the back. That's the request. He does hijama on the back. Then of his own accord, he starts to do hijama on the person's head. And then in this scenario, the person ends up fainting. Is he liable? Why? He's done more than what was requested. Even though he's skilled, he surpassed that was requested. So it could be the case that the marid, in this case, the patient, has more knowledge than the doctor, the practitioner. Why? Because the person knows himself. So he knows, if you touch my head, we're going to have problems. Now, if you touch my head, I'm going to faint. And so he's saying to stick to the back. The person, but how the practitioner, he surpasses that. And so due to that, it causes this particular matter of, or the person begins to faint, for example. He's not liable. Or bil-aks, the person says just do the back, and he doesn't really know how to do hijama. You see maybe a couple of TikTok videos. He says, "Khalas, easy." And then he ends up doing it, and he ends up cutting too deep, for example. Is he liable for that? He's liable. Well, he's not regarded as being someone that's skilled in that regard. Now, and so this is the older example of that. Now, and so what all of these things have in common as well, we mentioned that it is medical, but what they all have in common specifically is mubasharatul qat', and in the form of cutting the flesh or the skin. Now, so each of them, they have a job where they cut the flesh of the skin. So now, if the person is not skilled in that regard, فَلَا يَجُوزُ فَلَا يَحِلُّ, it's not halal for them to cut. Because of course, the asl of cutting the person is what? It's haram. The asl of cutting the Muslim, of course, I don't know what anybody individual. It's haram. The blood of the Muslim is haram. And we understand as well when it comes to the dam, the blood of the Muslim being haram, then this doesn't necessarily mean إلى الآخر الغاية, يعني the most, that you kill them. That is haram. But drawing blood from them in any way, shape, or form is haram, except for if there is istithna, if there is an exception or medical exception. But now, if the person doesn't have the skill to do that, then that asl, that first ruling, still remains. The first ruling still remains. Does that make sense, Barakallah? That the person is not able to do that. Is not quite skilled or qualified to do that. Naam. And so, if the person does that, then this is a fi'l which is muharram. Naam. It's a fi'l which is muharram. Likewise, the shepherd is not liable if he does not surpass again what is required from him and what is requested from him. And if the shepherd is not يتعدى. So the shepherd does not now fall into negligence in how he deals with the flock. So for example, if the shepherd, he's looking after the flock, and then he has the flock and he just goes to sleep, and he finds the sheep here, there, and everywhere. Now, this is ta'addi wa tafrit. This is negligence in that particular manner. So then, due to that, in that particular occurrence, he is negligent and thus liable. However, if he has taken all the means, he's done his due diligence in looking after the cattle or looking after that flock, now, and something still occurs to them. One of them, for example, is devoured by a wolf, killed and eaten by a wolf. Then it is not regarded as a case of the individual has not done the due diligence. Now, it's not regarded as the fact that they have not done their due diligence, or they have done their due diligence in this matter. And so due to that, it would be said that the person is not liable. Now. And likewise as well, is not regarded as the khayat, the tailor, as we mentioned as well, is not regarded as being liable as long as he has not fallen short when it comes to his work. So if something has become destroyed in his property or in his presence, then it's not something he's liable for unless he is negligent. So what we understand from this, barakallahu fikum, and all these things that have all these matters that we mentioned in terms of liability, then what they all have in common essentially is this matter of negligence. If the person is negligent, then they're liable. If the person rents something and negligent in that which they're renting, then they're liable. If the person has rented their time or themselves in terms of doing a particular khidmah, service, then they're liable. Now, if they're negligent. However, if something occurs due to other than negligence, then it cannot be said that the person now is liable. And this is something which is a common theme throughout all of that, and a common factor. Now, so it goes back to the skill set of the individual and how that person implements that skill. How the person implements that skill. If they implement the skill upon a manner which is correct and halal and upright, فَلَا شَيْء عَلَيْهِ. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. And we'll conclude with that particular point there. Barakallahu fikum wa jazakum Allahu khaira. Wa sallallahu wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Salam. No. The ruling on subleasing. It's a question that was actually asked to the Lajna Da'ima many years ago about subletting. Subletting itself is something which is halal in its asl. So if you, for example, you rent a property and then you're going to rent property on the behalf of another individual, or rent this property to another individual, then its asl is that it's halal, it's permissible. However, based upon the Lajna Da'ima, they mentioned that it has to be with the permission of the person that you are renting from initially. So it has to be with the permission of the Malik, the Malik al-Bayt, for example, the owner of the property. The owner of the property has to permit it. If he permits it, then you can rent. Now, if a lot of these contracts, whether it be ASTs, in assured secured tenancies, or tenancies with what do they call it now? Council property. What do they call it again? Council property and housing association. What's the term for it? Social housing. Now, so whether it's social housing or ASTs with private property, generally what you find within the contracts is that they may stipulate that you are not allowed to sublet. And so if you sublet in that regard, then it is not permissible. Why? Because the Allah Ta'ala states, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu awfu bil uqud. Oh, you believe, adhere to your contracts. So if you have a particular contract, then you have to adhere to it. Na'am, irrespective of whether the asl was haram. Why? Or halal, sorry. Because the asl of it being halal is one thing. Now, however, that contract has made it haram for you. So, na'am, it's permissible to do so as long as it is mentioned that you're able, that the contract allows you to do that. Allah Ta'ala knows best.
The same thing applies with letting services. Let's say I take my car to Musa, for example. Musa says, Musa gives it to Abdullah. So without my with or without my knowledge. But I pay Musa. Perhaps you pay Abdullah more the fee.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you've agreed, it depends upon what the agreement is. So if the agreement is for example, same example, you've given your car to Abdullah to fix. The agreement is just fix the car. That's it. Just give it back to me in the better condition I gave it to you. Now, in that scenario, then it's permissible, of course, because you've agreed that the car is brought back fixed. How he fixes it is up to him. He may fix it himself, or he may, for example, let's say, for example, he has a garage and he knows how to do car electrics. But you have a problem when it comes to the engine of the car, right? So he may now give it to an engine specialist, and that engine specialist fixes it. Or he might have, let's say, for example, he has a problem with the engine and electrics. So he fixes electrics and then gives it to the engine specialist, and then it comes back to you. What you've agreed with him was that the car comes back fixed. So in that regard, there's no issue with it. Unless, of course, you was to stipulate that only you fix it. But of course, this is generally, when it comes to like services, this is not the case. When it comes to services, you won't stipulate the individual doing the service. Generally speaking, you stipulate the service itself. So you say, I trust you to do this service, but it may not be him bidhati that does the service. Even with the khayata as well, as a common example. You go to the tailor measures you up and all of that stuff. He may not be the one that actually makes the fold. Now, 9 times out of 10, he's not actually the one that makes the fold. So he'll be the one that will send off all of your measurements to another tailor that actually makes it. Now, but it's not him that does it. So in this scenario, this is fine, inshallah. As long as you don't stipulate other than that. Oh, yeah. No.
You mentioned that if someone rents a commodity, they should return it the way they got it in the first place. But what if they don't return it, like the damage, and they returned it, damaged? Is that like what's the ruling on that?
So if they returned it, in lesser form than they've given it, then there's a point. Point is one of two things. Either they give them something in place of it that is in the same form, right? Or they give them the value of that damage, right? Just say, for example, I took the car, okay, and then the car, I damaged it. Either you give the whatever it's going to cost to bring it back to that first state, or you give something in its value, another car in its value, for example, to that. It's either or. No. No.
Question from my brother. If a brother has in his contract with his employer, he can't do any other job during the time he's employed with them, does he have to stick to that?
So if the person has a contract with their employer that they cannot be employed by anyone else during that time, are they bound by that essentially? No, they're bound by it because they've agreed to it, isn't it? They've agreed to it. So they've agreed that, for example, the best way to look at it is in the simplest way is that I've agreed to give my time to you and your company. And I'm going to give it exclusively to you and your company. And I'm not going to be compromised by anything else. Because now, if the understanding of the company making that stipulation is because we don't want you to be compromised and your time being compromised or your skill set being compromised by being hired by someone else, then they can stipulate that. Now, because we want to get the best out of you and the best out of your skill set for our services. So now a person is able to stipulate that. If now the asl is, of course, you don't have to agree to that. The asl is you can work for as many companies as you want. If you can hold down 10 jobs, hold down 10 jobs. Now that's the asl. But now, as soon as you start to make agreements, you are bound by those agreements. You're bound by those agreements, irrespective of what that agreement is. Now, if you've made the agreement, you have to abide by it. Based upon, again, the same ayah in Surah Al-Ma'idah. No. جزاكم الله خير إخوان، بارك الله فيكم. نكتفي بهذا القدر إن شاء الله. جزاكم الله خيرا، وصلى الله وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.